What's up, everybody? Yeah, this one's gonna be messy, guys. I'm glad it's gonna be small, but this is gonna be like kind of the first test audience for what we're trying to put together here. So I'm really excited to be able to sit down and have a little conversation. I want this to be as interactive as it can be with you guys. I want you to be able to watch it. Yes, you did get to watch it. Okay, awesome. Um, I want you guys to be able to interact and kind of help steer the conversation in ways that you want to talk about. So I don't want it to be me necessarily sitting down and really just like long form, blah, 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 me just talking the whole time. I want it to be a conversation with people in this film group. So if you are here, if you have watched the movie, um, let's talk about it. So this movie's been on my radar for a while. I follow Haley, the lead actress. We were in the same circle when I very, very first moved to LA. So to see her like go to where she's gone now, where she's in, Magnificent Seven and Girl on the Train and Swallow and all these big, big movies, I'm like just stoked to see somebody make it. I mean, for all intents and purposes, she's made it. So this was like so cool to be able to go watch a movie that's just like kind of her vehicle, and she was able to executive produce this with Joe Wright. Um, and so great choice by you guys because you voted on this. And so that's why we're sitting here today, and that's why I watched that movie. So yeah, this is cool. This is really cool. This was a great Halloween movie just because it's got that like just sort of uncomfortable vibe through just about the whole thing. Uh, but the filmmaking was really wonderful in the way that it set that vibe up. There's a really gnarly sequence right at the beginning that sort of feels disjointed from the rest of the movie. But I guess you kind of get to see, since we're talking spoilers here, they kill a sheep, a lamb. It's real gnarly. That's the stuff that's really hard for me to watch. They did a good job of really setting up that like uncomfortable feeling. Like they kind of set the stage by murdering something living, for lack of a more eloquent way of saying that, to really like set your audience up and go like, this movie will be uncomfortable. And so they did that really well. So that's why I had a hard time qualifying the movie as a horror. There's no jump scares, there's no ghosts. Ultimately, it's a movie about a woman trying to kind of find her place in the world. You know, she came from something and now she's in this new world that she's kind of a fish out of water. She doesn't really belong here, and everybody in the first act really makes her understand that by, the parents saying like, there's a scene where the mom is like, "You should grow long hair. Like my boy really loves long hair," and you're just like, "Oh, that's uncomfortable." You'd hope they'd have known each other long enough for her to know what kind of hair he likes, or the family to know that kind of thing. Um, and there's a bunch of sequences like that where you're just like, this girl does not belong here. The opening shot is beautiful. They really play with symmetry. Most of the movie is tripod shots. They're very still. They're very well composed, very well balanced, very symmetrical. Um, and they're all, again, to set the stage to show you like this is the world that this girl lives in, which is a very, it feels uncomfortable. It doesn't feel like she's a part of the world. It feels like the world is there and she's in it and the world is kind of happening around her. And then the next thing they do really well is they establish texture. Because this movie is about a girl who starts eating things that aren't meant to be eaten, I think it was a really, really smart choice on the director or producer, what creative team's behalf, to really focus on the texture of these things and these really sharp close-up shots of thumbtacks and jacks and clothespins and batteries and all of these things that like she's eventually going to eat, because that again just sells you on how uncomfortable this situation is. And ultimately it's to put you in her head. Everything is really uncomfortable. Like this girl is just trying to find her place in the world. Later on in the movie, you kind of figure out where she comes from. I'm going to save that part for later because that's one of my favorite parts of the movie. But, um, you know, you understand she didn't come from money. She says that she came from this place that she's, you know, she worked in retail selling toiletries. And so you're like, and then you see her in this gigantic, stark, beautiful, clean-cut, modern house. You understand that right from the get-go, the dad has paid for this house, and you're like, how did this girl get here? The thing that I absolutely love about this movie is they do such a good job of showing and not telling. Yes, the dad does say in the beginning, I bought you a house. I think that was necessary for you to understand that it wasn't necessarily the son that had got them to this point, because you realize how much of an influence the parents are going to have on their relationship throughout the film, because that just goes even more toward the core story of the movie, that this girl is just trying to find something grasping at straws to feel comfortable in the world that she lives in. And the way that that manifests is apparently a real disorder, mental illness or disorder, or I don't know, eating shit that isn't food. Oh man, those shots are effective. They're good. They do such a good job in the filmmaking side of it of not cutting away. You just watch her put a battery in her mouth or a thumbtack or a fucking screwdriver. This is the filmmaker's first feature, at least the first feature that they have listed on IMDb. So they've done 3 short films. Carlos, I didn't write his name down. Insert name here. 3 short films, which I would assume that Joe Wright and Haley had seen, and I'm sure they're award-winning. I'm sure they're wonderful. To trust the filmmaker in how to tell the story in visuals is a huge thing, because you don't have to rely as much on the writing if you understand the visuals that are going to take you from, you know, the beginning of the movie to the end of the movie. And so the movie really starts out with all these textural, extreme close-up ECU shots of the sheep being hacked up. God, that's going to stick in my memory forever. The thumbtack, the marble that she eats, the first thing that she eats, and the sort of ecstasy that she's in when she eats a marble and really discovers that, like, okay, maybe I can find happiness here, was all done so brilliantly, because traditionally in storytelling, you either have to have characters developed that are a new character that needs to learn about the world, that the main character is sort of explaining the world to. But this did such a great job of really showing you, through testament to Haley, her incredible acting, how she feels. And you just see it and you feel it. And these close, very still shots on how she feels when she finally eats something for the first time. And it's a really brilliant thing that not only were you able to show us something that feels uncomfortable, but also makes you feel for the character, that you actually are okay with the fact that she's feeling that way about something that feels so uncomfortable. Because you've established a world that's obviously uncomfortable for her to be in. So to see her find something that brings her a little bit of happiness and control, as she says, you really feel for the character. So even though she's doing something, like, you know, in your gut doesn't feel right, you're like, you kind of want her to still do it. You're like, yeah, go eat shit, girl. Like, go eat shit. Like, go find a thumbtack. Pull something out of a vacuum cleaner and eat it, because at least that'll be something that you can control. For the first half of the movie, you really understand she's in a world she can't control. She's got expectations of the family. Mom wants her to wear her hair a certain way. As soon as you find out she's pregnant, you sort of start to really get this feeling that, like, okay, the only reason the parents like you are because there's a baby involved. They did a really good job kind of putting you in her head and really understand. Go eat shit. Yeah, find a thumbtack. Exactly. The other thing that this movie does really, really well is you can tell her mental state by the color used in the film. And so this is what comes to production design. You've got to really sit down with your props people and your wardrobe people and your production designer to say like, okay, at this stage in the movie, in the beginning of the movie, when it's all stark tripod shots, you see this beautiful house, but there's no contrast. Everything is very washed out. Everything she's wearing, she sort of fits into her environment. She almost blends in. It feels like a catalog shoot, like a home design catalog shoot for like a West Elm, and she's just the model in the shot, but you feel that she's uncomfortable there. And then later on in the movie, as she starts eating things, you see vibrance. She starts putting color in the gardens. She starts putting colorful pillows on the couches. She even has a conversation with him at one point that, you know, she chose blue drapes. And you almost see him going like, what, blue? And she's like, well, you told me I could make a choice. And he's like, oh yeah, that's fine. That's fine. You could turn the sound off to the movie and just psychologically understand where she is sort of mentally, whether she feels in control and there's color involved. Even her outfit, her wardrobe starts to have a lot of color in it. And when she's not in control, it doesn't. And it feels kind of like a psych ward, you know, where they eventually try and end up putting her later in the movie when they realize they can't control this thing. The tone of the movie was brilliant. The slow pacing. With every story that you tell, there's a lot of ways you can go about telling that story. I can see them telling this story, which is a story about a girl who eats weird shit. A lot of people would take that in a direction and just go like, let's show like this really extreme lighting and like really blow up the sharpness of the needles and things that she's going to be putting in. And they didn't go that way. You know, they went with a very natural feel, which is one of my favorite ways to portray things like this, because you feel the realism, you feel that raw, like I'm in this world with the character. That is what a thumbtack looks like. It's not lit to some crazy degree where you're, you know, it looks like a Burger King commercial, and it really grips you and pulls you into that world. And that's what I really have to appreciate. I think the creative decisions that they made, and it's always a guess. You have an idea of what's in your head and what's going to be on screen and whether it's going to work or not. And almost everything worked. Almost everything worked. I had like maybe one or two moments in this movie where I was like, that's a stretch. For me, that moment was there's a party scene where, you know, a girl is refusing a sandwich that the main character has on a plate, Hunter has on a plate, and she's saying, ew, if I ate that, I'd have to like pump my stomach. And then everybody in the whole building turns and looks at her like, I can't believe you just said that. This does two different things. It allows Hunter to understand that her husband has told everybody about what she's going through, again showing her that she has absolutely no safety and can't trust anybody, which is fine. I think in the writing phase, that's a fine thing to go with. I think that makes sense. But in the way that it was executed, I had an issue with it, because they're at this party where there's music, everybody's talking loudly, and this girl didn't yell, I'm gonna have to pump my stomach in front of the whole party. She just sort of said it, and then everybody looked, and it felt set up, and it almost felt like one of those moments where you're gonna go into Hunter's mind, and this would be something sort of through her perspective, and then you would cut back to it and go, oh, people weren't listening, she just thought people were listening. But the people actually were. That was my issue with how that scene played out. That was like one of the few moments in this movie that just didn't work for me. Everything else, though, was so effective. Oh, one thing that I loved, another choice that they made, every single shot in the movie is on a tripod and has almost no motion. If it has motion at all, it's very calculated. You're following somebody, you're sitting down at a place or whatever, until she eats the first thing. And then we're handheld. We're on a shoulder rig and we're really moving, and we feel the raw world that she's in, and you feel like, okay, now we're in her mind and we're kind of seeing through things through her eyes rather than the world happening to her. Now we're in her POV. So those changes were a really, really nice touch. And that's something that I think every filmmaker should try and consider way before they're standing on set going like, all right, what shot are we going to get? This movie was definitely told in beautifully composed shots, not a whole lot of coverage, a lot of symmetry. Good choice to show her perspective at the party scene versus what was actually going on. Yeah, exactly. I think another variation of the movie could have gone that route where you're sort of seeing um, the parallels between or the dichotomy of what she's seeing versus what the family's seeing. I would probably make the same decision the filmmaker made and go, it's important that this girl feels out of control because ultimately the end of the story is her figuring out what control feels like and trying to feel like what a normal person feels like because she hasn't felt like that, especially for the course of the movie until those last few minutes. And that's another thing I gotta really have props for is for the movie and the filmmakers is it kept me guessing. This was not a predictable movie. I do have to admit, when I watch a movie, I'm expecting that the filmmaker is going to take me through the story. I'm not one of those people who watches and goes like, "Oh, I guess this is going to happen," or "That guy's going to go do that thing, and this girl's going to react this way, and then we're going to get to this." The only time I do that is when I'm sitting in a predictable movie and the the uh, the story is begging for me to start guessing. This was not one of those movies. This was a movie where I was like, "Oh, where's this going to go? Where's this going to go? Where's this going to go?" And I could just kind of sit back and get comfortable and watch and just go like, "All right, I don't know what's coming, and I'm excited to see what's next." I never had like a lapse of attention where I was just like, "Oh yeah, where am I?" I was there. I was there with her the whole time, which says a lot. I think that's high praise because most movies at this point, I think the attention span of the culture is so short at this point that if you're not constantly doing something to grab somebody and pull them back into the movie, you're going to lose your audience. And this movie never lost me. I was there. I was there the whole time, even in those like nice breathing moments. And I really love those where you're just like building the anticipation of, is she gonna eat that thumbtack? Oh no, she spit it out. Oh, she just went and ate the thumbtack. Okay. Oh, we just saw the thumbtack come back out. Okay. All right. They didn't have to go through really extreme situations um, to sell you on it. You just sort of see it in the real life perspective of what it was like for her. Oh, hold on, I'm reading your other comment. The red screen on the window made that moment feel uncomfortable, even with that montage of happies. I that is something I love so much. That moment where she puts the red thing over the window and you really just get that color, kind of for the first time in the movie, but it's such an ominous color, which is why I decided to put red behind me today. It felt like that was swallow color. I love music that sort of plays against the moment. And there was a lot of really nice musical choices in the movie as well, where it sort of lulls you into a false sense of security, or it just makes the moment even more awkward because your body tells you you should feel this way based on the music that you're hearing, but then your eyes and your brain are understanding the scenario in a completely different way because you're seeing something that is antithetical to the music. Uh, if you've seen End Trip back here, I chose to do that in a key moment of that movie as well. I'm not going to ruin that, but that was something that I wanted to use and try and employ in something that I did. So I loved the fact that they did that in this movie as well. 21 minutes into the movie, she gets asked by his mom, "Are you happy or are you pretending to be happy?" And that's really the question of the movie that sort of kicks everything off. The everything up to that point is kind of world building and showing you what what life is like in this house and what she's dealing with. And she gets asked that question, and then the following scene is her with a vacuum cleaner, just like going like this. And you're like, no, she's clearly not happy. Her surroundings, I think you automatically assume that because she's in this like multi-million dollar house with the most beautiful view in the world that like how could she not be happy? But it it's happens very quickly that you're watching and you go like, oh, this girl hasn't ever lived for herself and doesn't know who she is and doesn't know what makes her comfortable, and so she's like fallen into this like kind of Stepford wife habit of like, vacuuming and cooking and doing all of these things that don't make her happy. So that was a really nice moment where you're like, are you happy or are you faking being happy? And then the vacuum scene, and then obviously the thing that followed that was that pin, that first like painful object that she ate. And then yeah, and then it just goes in such a great direction. And I was assuming the whole movie was just going to be like her eating things. Like I really anticipated the end of the movie being like her slowly bleeding to death from all of the things that she was going to eat, because I'm like, she starts eating awful stuff so early. Um, and then they really set that up. They were like, well, they discovered through the ultrasound the things that she had been eating, and then everything was kind of a nice twist that I didn't anticipate. I gotta give props to the filmmakers for that. I mean, they really were able to take it in directions that I wasn't anticipating. Because it's 35 minutes in when the husband finds out what's going on. I thought that was going to be like the third act turn. Between the second and third act was going to be the husband being like, "What? You've been doing this, but we have a baby." That was my impression of the husband. And that wasn't how the story went. And that was really like a breath of fresh air, because it was like, well, if he discovers a third of the way into the movie that he's eating stuff, like where's it going to go now? And then they bring in the nurse, and he was really great. Yeah, crazy turn. And then the nurse, you meet this guy and you're like, oh, we're gonna hate this guy. We're gonna hate this guy. And then he's got a lot of like comedic elements to him. You don't have time for crazy shit, crazy thinking when there is war. And you're like, I like this guy. I like this guy. And then he helps her escape. I think that might have been the third act turn, was like this guy who we've set up to be this oppressive character along with everybody else in the movie ends up being her freedom. But you even hear his backstory, that he helped with Mima earlier, in the family's history. And yeah, it was great. That was great. Because you're like, I think I'm supposed to hate this guy. And then here he is going like, this family's awful. I've worked for this family before. Get the fuck out of here, lady. It was like really smart. But again, the world goes back and forth between this like color and Stark based on how much control she has, which I think is just brilliant. I can't wait to be able to play with something like that in one of my films. And it's one of those things that you've got to map out early. You can't be making these decisions when you're on set that day. You can't make that decision when you're in color grading. You can affect things a little bit, but like you've got to put those pieces together early on in the process. So the halfway point in the movie is when you find out that everybody knows about it. That's that moment at the party where she's like, I'd have to get my stomach pumped. And then she realizes like, wow, her secret isn't safe with anybody. Like there's nobody in this world that she can trust. And then she's back to the beginning. That right after that moment, there's all this color, there's all this beauty in the world. And then she realizes she can't trust anybody. And then it's like the first shots from the movie again, where she's just stuck in this colorless, dark, washed out world going, what am I going to do? The first half of the movie was really good about showing you and not telling you. And then you always get to this point in the writing process where you're like, how do I get this like backstory about the character through to the audience? And this is where they employed the therapist. The therapist gets to hear some really critical information that lets you understand who Hunter is and where she came from and what she's all about, that she obviously can't say to her husband or the family because they just don't listen to her. They don't care. She's not a priority. So the therapist is a cliche in a lot of ways. I'm writing a story right now where having that character that the lead can confide in and ultimately deliver a bunch of exposition to would be super necessary, but I want to find more creative ways to do it. As I was watching, I was going, what else could she have done to convey the information that she's a product of rape to somebody other than, writing it in a journal or having, a best friend that turns on her at some point in the movie. So I think the therapist was just about the only way they could really get that information across. And it worked really well, and they were able to wrap it up and later really nicely with her kind of overhearing the conversation with the husband. So I think it worked. That was one of those moments in my head that I was like, therapist cliche? Hunter's voice changed at the end as well. Yeah, exactly. The whole course of the movie, he's really letting her know, like, yeah, no, I really like you. Like, I know you're eating thumbtacks and shit, but like, you could never do any wrong in my eyes. And that's really where you get that, like, is he real? Because this doesn't seem right. And then, yeah, you in that phone call at the end, he's bathed in this red light from the brake lights from the cars, and he's like, "I'll fucking hunt you down." And you're like, I've seen that guy. I've seen him the whole time since the tie scene. I knew that's who you were, bruh. But it was good because I hate it when, the villain in the movie is too heavy-handed too. So everything was really nice and understated and really let you discover it on your own. That was that movie where it's like, I'm gonna hunt you down and kill. He says some pretty awful stuff. Where I was like, all right, well, he kind of showed all of his cards at that point. But it also gave her like the impetus to be like, okay, I'm gonna go, and then smash her phone, which I would have done too. Well, I want to talk about one thing before I get to the end of the movie, which I loved. Loved. There's one key scene that I like can't wait to talk about. Great use of the environment visually. You got this big house, big giant house. It's probably not an angle of that house that's going to be ugly, but the way that they put a lot of the shots together with, the composition of the shots where he's in a reflection but it's not like a clear reflection. It's like a glossy closet door or something, and she's in the background, and all of these things tell such a psychological story that if you don't do the right way, it's either like, look, we're trying to be artsy, or if you favor the visuals over the storytelling and over the emotional aspect of it, it just rings, we're trying to be artsy, versus when you do it selectively and carefully and artfully, like in this movie, it's so effective when you're showing, him in the closet door reflection and her standing there in real time, and their discussion right after we've seen him say like, no, I love you unconditionally, there's literally nothing you could ever do wrong, to this moment later where they're discussing whether she ironed his tie or not. It's like, okay, clearly this isn't how you feel. But they did such a good job of riding that line between finding really beautiful ways to show a scene through reflections and lines and composition, and balancing her, and making her feel really small where she's like down in the corner and then she's got this big vast world around her that she can't control or whatever it was. They did a really brilliant job. It's a hard thing to walk that line between like being too artsy and losing some of your storytelling. And they really towed that line beautifully. But then the end of the movie, man. That nurse that lets her out, that was such a good moment where you're like, I think this guy's bad, and he's kind of a red herring because he's obviously loyal to the family. He's worked with them before. And then he makes this split-second decision like, you got to get out of here. You got to get out. And that's that moment in the movie where I was like, oh, this could kind of be the end. She just gets away. And then there's the phone call where he's saying he's going to hunt her down. So then you're like, well, there's only like 15, 20 minutes left in this movie. How are we going to have this like whole hunt down scene? And then we never see the family again. And I love that because in my brain, I'm going like, oh, great, you've established all these characters. Like, we've got to see how they wrap up. But the story was never about them in the first place. It was always about Hunter. And so then you're following Hunter and you discover like her mom, who had these two other legitimate children, doesn't have time for Hunter because there's no room in the house. How sad for you. Really just sells that like pain that this girl's been in her whole life, again justifying all the crazy things that she's going through to try and just like feel like she belongs in the world. until she's got basically no choice left but to go confront her dad, her biological father, a guy who raped her mom. Done in the hands of the wrong filmmaker, this could have gone wrong in so many ways. And that wasn't the case in this movie. It goes so right. I guess the way that I want to talk about this is casting. So for Haley, who played Hunter, she's the main character. She's in every single scene in the movie, except for maybe two or three. She's had months to prepare to really discover this character, and she does such a terrific job of being this girl. And you can believe her, and she's not overselling anything. You still feel a real human being under that. And then you've got the insane task of casting somebody that's going to play her dad, who until this point you've seen in like a 1 by 1 inch newspaper mugshot photo. And this guy's got to step in and understand the tone of the writing, the tone of the directing, the tone of the dad, who he was when it happened, who he is now, his relationship with everybody that he's dealing with within her world. I mean, he's got such a tall order as an actor to bring all of these things to the screen believably. And this actor kills it. Kills it. Absolutely kills it. And I've been realizing more and more a lot of the acting really does rely on the directing, because it's the director's job to kind of take the writing and see the vision in their mind's eye and then be able to bring it to the screen, obviously. So whatever collaboration that was between the writing and the actor and the director and the DP and bringing it to the screen, everything comes down to like, screw the theatrics, screw the production value. We're going close up, close up, close up. Like, we've got two characters standing super tight in the frame, and we've got nothing to distract the audience. It's literally just reliant on the actors being able to bring this, to the emotional core. And to find an actor, because that scene was shot in one day. I have no doubt in my mind that they had that one actor for one day that played her dad. And so for him to come in, it's such a scary thing to be the actor that works one day, because you're coming into an entire family of people that have been working together for weeks or sometimes months on a shoot. And then you've got to like show up and like introduce yourself to everybody and feel like who's who and what's the hierarchy and who do I answer to, and all the while you're going like, who's my character? What do they want me to be? You're trying to watch some of this other scenes go on to figure out like the tone of the film. And this actor walks in and just destroys these scenes, and they're so emotional and so perfect. And you get to see this showdown between these two people who literally have never met each other, yet have such a close unspoken bond. And you get to see this guy deal with this human being that he's accidentally put on the planet, sort of accidentally, sort of on purpose, and all of the emotions that come along with that. And that was just like one of those scenes that couldn't have been shot any better. In my opinion, I don't think you get a better end result from those two actors in the scene. And to me, that's that one scene that really sticks with me from the whole movie, is just this dad and daughter meeting for the first time. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. And it's such like a topic that's, politically relevant and culturally relevant and all of these things. And you get to see it kind of play out in a way that you've never seen it play out before. So I really just have to like, hats off to everybody that had a creative choice in that process, because however much time they took, like, they knew that was the scene that really, really needed to work. And at one point, like, one of the party guests walks in and is like, hey, I'm just gonna get something out of the fridge. And the dad's like, right on. And totally plays it off. And it doesn't seem cheesy, and it seems like totally real to the situation. And that balancing act of like making sure the realism stays. Because in a lot of ways, it's a stylized movie where you're like, I'm not totally in reality, but I'm not removed from reality either. I think a lot of directors, there's directors that like everything has this veneer that removes you from reality. I think Spielberg is one of those directors. You feel like you're watching one of these, like everything's just perfectly constructed and perfectly lit, and your mind's eye goes, well, that's not how I'm used to seeing the world, therefore I'm watching a movie. And I tend to think of those as like kind of blockbustery. They favor, you know, 2 or 3 grip trucks full of lighting gear to really bring you something that looks perfect, to just embracing what natural lighting looks like. And that's what I really appreciated that again in this movie, was that it really drew you into the realism where you're not going, your brain isn't subconsciously telling you this is fake. Therefore, you have this baseline of reality that you have to live up to as a filmmaker through the writing and the lighting and the editing and the acting, that really just keeps you grounded in reality. And there was a lot of things that in another director's hands would have been totally unbelievable, or just would have seemed really like over the top. And they held everything together so perfectly through the whole movie. So I was really like, you know, it's a movie about abortion at the end of it, about like, you know, should you end a child's life, should you not end a child's life, or and they really, despite my own feelings about it, they really draw an amazing parallel on either side of the argument and go like, well, this is a child of, you know, rape living in the world, and kind of what a person has to go through that's a product of something like that, versus somebody that was in a loving relationship having to decide what to do with her baby. And it's just like, I don't know, thematically you're always attacking a bunch of different things, going like, you know, what am I really trying to tell the audience? And to me that's a really good story, is like, if you can hide your your themes from the audience underneath real, authentic, emotional, intriguing storytelling, where you don't feel like it's heavy-handed and somebody's just trying to like spoon feed you this, you know, inspirational or cultural theme. uh, Again, just hats off. Movie really killed it for me. I mean, in a lot of ways. It's only got, I think, a 6.8 out of 10 on IMDb, but anybody can rate it, anybody can watch it, and not every movie is everybody's cup of tea. But in terms of filmmaking, in terms of casting and writing and directing and cinematography and acting and musical choices, uh, I had almost nothing. I think the scene with the girl saying, I would have to get my stomach pumped, and everybody like turning to her, that scene, and then the dad telling the daughter it's bedtime, even though it's like a daytime birthday party. What? Those were those 2 moments where I was like, all right, we could have gone a little bit further on both of those and thought a little bit harder about it. But I mean, really like 95% there. Everything was there. I would have taken out the murdering lamb in the beginning, but you know, that's just me. Stuff's hard for me to watch. But again, setting the tone. So anyway, um, that's about all I have on this movie. I was really, really impressed by it. I think the budget, because it's mostly a single location, was pretty cheap. This is not a shoestring budget movie that an independent filmmaker has made. You know, Joe Wright did Darkest Hour. He did Pride and Prejudice. He's a big time director. He's executive producer. So obviously they had resources. Could you have made this movie on $1,000 or $10,000? Yeah, yeah, you definitely could have. I think just about everything that happened in this movie was doable on a very, very small budget. So this is one of the reasons that I think this was a great choice to really dig into. You know, this isn't Avatar, this isn't Avengers, where we need $200 million to make a movie. This is a great one for people to watch and get a little bit of inspiration on how to do something on a budget. Despite them obviously having more resources, they were able to do things on a bigger level and take more time to do it. But this is totally feasible on like a one grand film level. So uh, yeah, if you're watching this later on YouTube, if that's you, head over to the Facebook group, One Grand Film open filmmaker group. We're going to do these fairly often, and you guys get to vote on what I'm watching and what we talk about, and you get to be in the chat live with me, asking questions and steering conversation. And yeah, so yeah, thank you everybody that came for the first one and has checked this out. And come check out One Grand Film. We're a film group that is dedicated to helping first-time filmmakers get their first feature films off the ground and take intentional steps into building the film career of their dreams, starting with a really cheap movie. So if that's something that you're interested in and you're finding this somewhere on the internet, come check us out. We'd love to have you. All right. Bye, guys.